Tom has been introduced several times this week. Here we have my good friend and colleague Steve Wallace, who is IU's Enterprise Network Architect and Technical Advisor. And I'll just forego all the other nice things I had to say about you, Steve.
Thank you.
And they're going to talk about DDoS mitigation and our new I-Light scrubbing service that we're working on rolling out.
Thank you. No. They'll display it. Go back to the beginning. I'll drive. You just tell me when to change slides.
Go ahead and change slides. Go ahead. Yeah, okay. So, hi, thanks for coming.
It's on you, not that one.
What? Oh, this one's on me, that's right, okay. I can move around. So we live in a really weird time. You know, not too long ago, we weren't privy to the tools that the NSA and the CIA made to spy on people and to infect our computers. That seems not too long ago. You know, in fact, they're really good at making those tools. We should all give them a round of applause. And we know that now because they're released on a regular basis. Last night, WikiLeaks released a new batch of CIA tools, and this batch of tools is designed to infect home routers. So, you know, I'm going to be talking about DDoS, and DDoS in part is enabled by lots of machines throughout the internet being infected in some way. Well, there's a whole new set of professional, you know, government-capable tools that were distributed last night. And, you know, if that's not enough for you, Shadow Brokers, I think, now offers a subscription for the NSA tools. So I think for about 20 grand, you can get their monthly release of the NSA tools. So, you know, this problem is getting weirder and worse. So DDoS attack, just want to make sure we're on the same page. It's when usually a lot of devices in the internet do something to target one or a small number of devices. And typically, it's the volume of activity that causes a problem at the target site. Sometimes it causes problems for individual server. Sometimes the volume can be so high that it causes problems for the network itself. So next slide. It's getting worse. I stole 3 graphics from a report from Verisign, which you can get online. You have to give Verizon your email address and stuff. But in any event, what is interesting here is the over 10 gig attack is now, or you know, in the last quarter, about 23% of what Verisign. Verisign is seeing in their, you know, in their visibility of the environment. You know, a lot of the attacks over gigabit per second, and that's a big concern for many sites. I mean, you're fortunate. The research and education community generally has had really big internet pipes, and we're able to absorb a lot. And so 1 gig is not necessarily something that's going to do us in, but you talk to a business, even a relatively large size business, or you talk to a school system like a K through 12 school system, and that's big enough to cause quite a bit of damage, and the attacks keep getting larger. Next slide. Average peak attack, you know, we're now up to 14 gigabits per second. Again, they're growing in intensity, and there's no reason to think that this won't continue. There's no magic piece of technology that's going to make this better. This is an architectural weakness of the internet. Next slide. They're also getting more sophisticated. So the October 21st attack against Dyn, which is a DNS provider that knocked off Twitter, Box, PayPal, a bunch of others, was an example of a sophisticated attack where the bots could do different things, and that makes it much more difficult to defend against. Typically, in a lot of DDoS attacks, there's one technique that's being used to create the traffic, and so you can kind of narrow your defense to that one thing. Well, that's changing. They're getting more sophisticated, and individual attacks are increasingly using more than one technique to drive the traffic. So next slide. So there are basically three approaches to mitigating the effect of a DDoS attack. You can absorb the attack. So you might have an attack that's just not too big, and it doesn't really affect your infrastructure. So for example, there are parts of IU's infrastructure that if it had a 1 gig DDoS attack, it wouldn't be noticeable. Without detection gear to see it happening, we wouldn't notice it. I can pretty much guarantee that if there are campuses here that don't have the ability to detect attacks today, you are getting attacked more often than you may think, and you're not seeing them, and you're able to absorb them, or they're brief enough that you chalk the outages up to just something weird. Just reboot it, right? That kind of thing. Another approach is if you know what's being attacked, if you know the target of an attack, you can black hole the traffic. And what that means is you can tell the upstream networks traffic that's going to that victim, just drop it. Don't forward it on to me. And that message can be propagated throughout the internet. And in fact, the Indiana GigaPOP has the ability to propagate to their upstream providers information that says if there's traffic going to this particular host, drop it. So that's a tool that we have right now. So if anybody is under a really high volumetric attack that's taking their infrastructure down, could be taking your whole campus down, could be damaging the regional network like I-Light, could be damaging some of the upstream providers, even the commercial providers. So we have a tool that says, well, just stop sending me that traffic to that host. Well, the side effect of that is that host becomes unreachable from the internet. So if that's your main web server, and you say, well, just don't send us traffic for that, nobody can get to your web server. The third approach lets you keep the web server up and running while it's under attack. And there are different variations to this approach, but I'm going to talk about one called scrubbing. And it's a service that is becoming more common. And I'll talk a bit about Internet 2's role in offering that service to the community. So basically, scrubbing is when you divert the attack traffic to these warehouses full of servers, and these servers have some special software that figures out which traffic is bad traffic, which traffic is the attack traffic, and which traffic is the legitimate traffic, and then forwards just the legitimate traffic to your campus. So essentially, these scrubbing centers they usually have facilities around the globe, and they draw the attack traffic that's closest to them. So they draw it all out on the edges of the internet before the attack traffic has concentrated enough to cause pain for providers. And they literally have thousands of servers that have proprietary software that attempts to look at that traffic and figure out which is the attack traffic, which isn't, and send you the good stuff. And so the result is there might be a little bit higher latency to the service, but the server gets to stay up even though it's under attack. Next slide. So the Indiana GigaPOP is a pilot participant in Internet 2's DDoS cloud-based scrubbing service. So Internet 2 put together an RFP looking for a scrubbing provider that could leverage the Internet 2 network infrastructure and offer maybe a better service because that infrastructure exists to the regional networks that connect to Internet 2. And the Indiana GigaPOP basically raised our hands and said, we'd like to be a pilot. We'd like to influence which vendors get picked, what services are considered, how they're implemented, and we like it right out the door. We'd like to try it right away. So after a complex selection process where there was one false start made, the community has converged on a company called ZenEdge, relatively new but pretty well-funded company that specializes in DDoS protection and other security services. And Internet 2 will be offering, probably in the July timeframe, a couple types of scrubbing service to their membership. Next slide. Now, they're going to offer a couple different services, but the basic service and the service that everyone was driving Internet to adopt is a service where the regional network or maybe the campus network detects the attack. So there's some infrastructure in place to detect an attack. And then once an attack is detected, that entity can use the BGP protocol to essentially notify the scrubbing service, here is the host or the subnet the host is on that's under attack. And then at that point, the scrubbing center will announce that as though they're the best way to get to that route to the rest of the internet and Internet 2. So you'll say, here's the IP address of the thing that's being attacked. ZenEdge then will say to the rest of the entire internet, I'm the best way to get there, come to me. And when all that attack traffic and good traffic arrives at ZenEdge facilities, their servers will sort the good from the bad, and then they'll forward the good traffic on. Next slide. Oh, this is for you, isn't it?
Yeah, but you can keep going. I'll talk if you like.
So Tom's going to talk about the specifics of how this is going to work for the Indiana GigaPOP, and we can take questions afterwards.
Okay. So Steve was talking about the concept and what Internet 2 is offering and how the GigaPOP is going to take advantage of it. I wanted to talk about a few points that are specific to the implementation and how it could affect I-Light and GigaPOP members. So the GigaPOP does two different VRFs. They do the RNE VRF and they do the commodity VRF. The ZenEdge is going to exist in the commodity VRF, primarily because we see attacks coming from commodity entities and across the internet. We hope that our RNE members aren't attacking each other, but it's not outside the realm of possibilities, especially with kids and their Xboxes and everything else. So, as Steve said, ZenEdge will accept up to a /24, which is generally considered the commodity standard smallest prefix. So for schools that have a /16, a /20, even a /23, if we advertise the more specific /24 to force that through ZenEdge's network, most specific routing will kick in, and therefore that traffic will divert that way. If you're an institution that only has a /24, then what we may have to do is add some prepending to that so that it makes it appear that we're further away than ZenEdge is, because otherwise what could happen is, depending on where the carrier is, depending on where the traffic is, it could come still into the Indiana GigaPOP without being forced to go out through the ZenEdge network. That doesn't apply to a whole lot of schools or a whole lot of entities. There's only a handful, and we'll take care of that on the school's behalf. We'll essentially have to prepend everything to make the GigaPOP appear equally across the entire internet, that we're just a little bit further away, so that when we do need to force traffic through ZenEdge, we can predict the path that it's coming in. If you're a /16 school, it doesn't really matter, or 17 or whatever, because once you announce that /24 more specific, it's always going to go through ZenEdge. And customers who have smaller than a /24. Again, there's not a lot of those out there, but there are some schools that might have a 16 block of addresses or a 32 block of addresses. Because the internet standard is a /24, we would have to announce the entire /24 that smaller institution is part of. Therefore, if you're adjacent to that institution, your traffic is going to get scrubbed as well. Now, and you might have to help me here, when ZenEdge scrubs traffic, they're still delivering all the clean traffic to us. They're only going to filter out the bad traffic. So the negative side is it's higher latency, but it's not like people that are adjacent to a smaller one that get scrubbed even though they're not getting attacked is
Right,
just
so
latency.
ZenEdge is going to return all the good traffic. For anything that ZenEdge announces and draws, they're going to forward all the good traffic back to the regional network. I think it may be the case that you can actually tell ZenEdge, we know you have to announce this /24, but only worry about this one IP address. So just pass the rest of the traffic through.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of a fundamental philosophical question. They should pass it through anyways, even if it's
But without going through their
inspected.
scrubbing stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So they can bypass, I believe they can say, oh, it's just that server within that, and so will not cause any more impact, like latency, on the rest of it.
Okay.
So
Well, I hadn't heard that, so that's good to know.
I think.
So, the other thing is members who actually BGP with I-Light or the Indiana GigaPOP can signal that themselves. So if you're someone who peers with I-Light and you see this event coming on, you could advertise a /24 to us with the appropriate BGP communities. The GigaPOP will signal that to ZenEdge, and that'll come back through the scrubbing service automatically. So there's not a lot of those entities out there, but if that's something that you're interested in, we will make sure that we update the GigaPOP BGP communities page so that's available to everyone. So, and then the last bullet point here is adds latency to the scrub traffic we discussed. So what's the timetable? Well, as Steve mentioned, we're looking at possibly July. Right now, there's a contract negotiation with IU. They're the fiscal agent of the Indiana GigaPOP, so they have to amend the agreement with Internet 2. That's in the process. Linda from Internet 2 mentioned yesterday she's going to forward me the actual technical setup for the initiation of the service. So once I get that, we'll start advertising, or we'll start filling that out and getting it done. We also need to do testing. We need to do BGP community setup. Those are the things that we need to do in order to prepare to actually activate this service and make it available to members. The ZenEdge service, I believe, is coming out of LA and Ashburn. So that's the scrubbing centers.
Currently. Right.
Currently. They're thinking about adding a third one in
I think Chicago.
Chicago.
And they have some internationally.
Okay. I think in our case, we'll start with LA and Ashburn, but if the Chicago becomes a benefit, Chicago probably makes more sense because of the proximity to us. But we're going to definitely make sure that we're diverse in covering and coverage. So the Indiana GigaPOP will peer with ZenEdge via Internet 2 in Chicago and Indianapolis. If you were here yesterday and hear me talk about the GigaPOP and our connectivity, we have connectivity to Internet 2 through Chicago and Indianapolis. And this is going to come across the 100 gig interconnects we have between the two networks. So the anticipation there is we're going to have more than enough bandwidth to assume the scrub traffic coming back in. We're not going to run into an issue with congestion or anything of that nature. So the other thing I mentioned yesterday was I was talking about the NetFlow analyzer, and I talked to a few folks after the fact. DNS amplification is one thing that has something that they see a lot. And so one of the things that we need to do is populate our NetFlow analyzer with DNS servers. So we'll send out a mailer soon to all the technical contacts at the school, but we need to know what all your DNS servers are. We need to get that information populated. Some of them are easy to figure out because they either say nameserver.entity.edu or dns.entity.edu or ns.entity.edu. Some of them are less harder to figure out. The example I used yesterday was fred.entity.edu. I don't know what Fred is, so I need to know that information. So we'll send that out, we'll collect that, we need to populate that. The NetFlow analyzer is going to be our way to identify when DDoS traffic is happening. There are certain rules that we can set up so that it detects when certain traffic flows occur. But that detection also could be somebody picking up the phone and say, hey, I'm seeing a lot of traffic here. We can go in and take a look and see if that's something that we need to do. And if so, then we can trigger the scrubbing on your behalf, or you can trigger it for yourself. The last thing I want to mention here is that while we can detect DDoS between member to member, it's very difficult for us to scrub it just because of the architecture of the network. Scrubbing service sort of exists outside of the Indiana GigaPOP. So if it's two entities on I-Light, it's very difficult for us to forward that traffic out from entity A out to the internet and back into the entity. So we'll be able to detect it, and in those situations, it'll probably be more of like a phone call to entities and say, hey, you realize you've got a DDoS from possibly students going from one entity to the other, and figure out ways that we can address that, whether we block the traffic coming in from the school or something of that nature. So I think that's all we had. We're happy to take any questions that you might have, whether it's about Internet 2, the ZenEdge piece, the GigaPOP, how we can do setup, or DDoS in general.
It sounds like this is something that you'll begin just offering by default to all institutions, not an opt-in service?
Not a what service?
An opt-in?
Yeah, I believe the default is an opt-in service for all members, yes.
Also, does it handle DDoSes against IPv6 targets?
Yes.
It can, but they don't think they've seen any.
Okay.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, so ZenEdge has the ability to do v6 DDoS mitigation. The focus is getting the v4 infrastructure up, because ZenEdge has said, yes, but it doesn't happen yet. So, but they actually have the capability, and the plan is Internet 2 service will, so the VRF that they're creating for ZenEdge will also be a v6 VRF, and yes.
So here's an interesting question/theory. Do you think that's because v6 propagated to homes is not that prevalent, and therefore might be why people haven't taken the opportunity to use v6?
So no.
Okay.
Because most of us, okay, so how many of us have Comcast, AT&T, or Charter, or, okay, so those of you who do that and have a modern computer at home and modern wireless router are v6 connected. And your traffic to YouTube and Google and those things is all v6, even though you don't know it. It just is. It's magic. A lot of the devices that get infected for bots are not yet v6 connected, because the ways they get infected, the way they get discovered to be infected, sometimes isn't easy to do for a v6 machine. So for example, let's imagine that I was infected right now in this room, and you were all computers, and you were running only v6. We're all running v6, and I decide I'm going to scan all the address space in this room to find you, to infect you, okay? We're going to have to wait till the universe freezes before I'm going to hit an address that's actually one of you, as opposed to the billions that are nothing. And so the spreading mechanism causes them to focus on the v4 stack. But you know, if you've got a broadband connection at home from any major provider, you're v6 connected. Your PC's v6 connected, you're using v6.
I'm going to have to disagree with you because I know that mine at home does not, but that's okay. That wasn't a setup, by the way.
So I understand the ZenEdge thing where they want to block a whole IP for a particular server, but then you're basically talking black holing. So, what?
Hold your mic closer. I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm usually real loud. That's why.
I know.
So if they only want to restrict legitimate traffic to a particular service IP address, they have to do a deeper inspection of the packet, correct?
Yeah, so if you've got something under attack, and we tell them to announce the /24 that contains the subnet that contains the server that's under attack. And the reason that has to be done is because the internet won't accept something smaller. You can't just say to the rest of the internet, here's a route to this one computer. When that traffic comes to ZenEdge, ZenEdge is going to look right deep into it, the traffic, yeah. Because some of the attacks, they have to, some they don't have to, okay? The NTP or DNS amplification, at the NetFlow level, they can figure it out. But yes, some traffic they'll have to inspect, and it's even more complicated than that because some of it will be encrypted, right? And they're going to have to look at things like, they're going to have to like, one way you can attack a web server is you can talk to it really slowly and slow the conversation way down so the web server is all of a sudden holding the state for this connection that's so slow, and then a whole bunch of them pile up. And so they're going to have to look for things like that. But what they're not going to look for are things like worms and viruses. Okay? It's not going to provide any kind of security. They're not going to say, oh, we see a, you know, they might see WannaCry over 445 as legitimate traffic. They're going to see that as SMB traffic and pass it. So they're not going to filter viruses or anything like that, but they're going to look for things that are cause a DDoS, either at the network level or at the host level, and in some cases they'll have to dive a little deeper to see what's going on. They won't tell us exactly how they do that. No, we do not trust them. We have a contract with them. And the contract says that they don't save that data, and they don't use the payload data. They are allowed to use the patterns that they identify to improve their systems, but they are not allowed to do anything with the payload, and that's in the agreement.
Just curious, who's absorbing the cost? Internet 2, GigaPOP, or higher ed?
So that the
We're going to factor that into the overall rate structure for the GigaPOP. So anyone who's connected to the GigaPOP will be paying a portion of that charge. So I-Light will pay into that. Indiana University, Purdue, all the GigaPOP members.
I will say that, and this is true, I've looked at these numbers, it's a smoking good deal. I mean, it really is. It's amazing. They offered a very, very good deal. So hopefully this will work well for people.
Other questions?
Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I won't sing or anything. So there's a project I've been engaged in at IU, and I thought you might find it just a little bit interesting to hear that we're doing this. So we have a disaster recovery plan where it says, here's some tier 0 services, like, you know, power, shelter, network, those things. And then people who have critical services assume that those tier 0 services will be up and running before they try to bring back their VMs or their applications or whatever. But what we don't really think about well is what happens if the network is the campus network but not the internet, or not the whole internet. What does that mean? And I'll give you a couple of quick examples of why this is interesting, and we're trying to, you know, we're gonna come out with a report that categorizes some of our critical applications into different ways that they behave in such an environment. So you heard Bob talk earlier about a situation where, and this would happen of IU. So if IU was cut off from the internet, if you were at IU, you couldn't get to Box because Box is out on the internet. If you were at Starbucks, you couldn't get the Box because the authentication was on campus. So if IU gets cut off the internet, Box, Canvas, the learning management system, all those things don't work anywhere. Then you think, well, okay, what could we do to make that better? The learning management system is pretty critical, and it's in Amazon, and we could get a separate connection to Amazon. We probably will. And you think, okay, then we could get to the, so then if you're on campus, you could get to the authentication and the learning management system. Good deal. Except you can't for very long. You start to look into this stuff, and the Canvas uses the domain name infostruct.com or infrastructure.com. Well, if you disconnect IU from the internet, over time, the IU name servers their caches for things like infrastructure.com will time out. And then that name server is going to go, oh, well, I need to ask top-level-domain.com server where the infrastructure.com name server is, and it can't. So all of a sudden, I thought I built this connection to Amazon to fix this problem, and it will fix it for about an hour, at which point there's not enough name server hierarchy. Well, then you start thinking about, well, where else does this take place? Well, IU has a really close relationship with iuhealth.org. We do video conferencing back and forth where there's name server addresses involved, mail, all this stuff. So if IU loses connection to the internet, despite the fact that we have multiple pairings with iuhealth.org, it's possible that a whole bunch of servers would be, a bunch of services would no longer be usable across that because of this crazy thing. We can't get out to some of the internet top-level DNS servers. So there are all kinds of things like that. We're starting to look at what, how would we preserve certain critical services and what would they look like during those kinds of outages. So just something to think about. Are we done?
Other questions?
When an attack happens like that and the traffic gets rerouted and all that, what's the typical latency that gets introduced?
There's two kinds. One is when it first switches over. So you announce it and you draw traffic to ZenEdge. And ZenEdge sells a couple different services. One of the services, they are looking at your NetFlow feeds all the time. And so when something's under attack, they already know what its normal behavior looks like, and they can respond more quickly to mitigating it. That's not what we're getting. So there are a couple things. Traffic has to reroute, that won't take very long, but their systems have to start to learn what's wrong, and they tell us that's a minute or two. So something's under attack, either automated or manual system, you say, scrub this, then you might wait a minute or two. That's what they're telling us. We're going to have to do some testing for their systems to go, okay. Looks like this is normally a web server, and here's junk that's not right and filtered out. Then after that, the other thing is the just ongoing latency. And I don't have information from them other than it's not that bad.
Well, there's transport latency depending on where the scrubbing is coming from, as well as application latency and how much it takes to scrub that. And it's difficult because unless you know where it's coming from, it's probably hard to predict exactly what your transport latency will be.
You won't like it being scrubbed all the time, but understanding that things will be usable, well usable, but probably not as snappy.
Well, or versus taking a web server offline.
Right.
Yeah, or mail server or something of that nature.
So slow versus not available. Slow
Yeah.
sounds better.
Yeah.